Another is climate change. For example, I think an outfit down in Australia found a way to produce hydrogen from water that's 4 times more efficient than the current way of generating hydrogen. And if that can be scaled up, then that may very well become the replacement to oil and gas. That's jet fuel necessary for propelling aviation, which I think contributes to about 4% of the particulate emissions around the world. And that percentage will, of course, increase as we rapidly move into renewables like solar, wind, geothermal.
Martians landed?
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits?
Yes.
Drinking Henry Seltzer?
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit?
Yes, and?
Your branding here?
Yes, brand.
Your message here?
Yes, and?
A verse about?
Yes.
Your product here?
Yes.
I'm Hirsch Redmond.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
I'm speaking today with Dave Fradin. Dave is the president of Spice Catalyst, but we were also talking about catalytic items of various degrees chemically that can get us ready for an interview. Was that right, Dave? Were we?
Yes, it was. I'm consuming large quantities of filtered water right now.
Okay, so we've moved from prune juice and LSD to filtered water. That's what our listeners have to look forward to. If they're younger, they might think, "Oh, I was afraid of prune juice." We're like, no. The prune juice is early life experimentation.
No, it's late life.
Late life. Okay, well, here we go. Well, let's start with a quick intro to David Fradin, a classically trained HP product manager. That's where he started. He was then, of course, recruited by Apple to bring the first hard disk drive on a PC to market. And later at Apple, a business unit manager, pretty much at the same level as Steve Jobs. And he's written several books, Building Insanely Great Products, Organizing and Managing Insanely Great Products, and Successful Product Design and Management. All of those are available on Amazon, but Dave is available today here only on Yes Brand. And so welcome, Dave, to the Yes Brand Podcast.
Glad to be with you.
It's great to have you. I enjoyed our previous conversation, which was not recorded, and I enjoyed our pre-recording conversation, which was not recorded. But now that we're recorded and we have you on the record, I'm just going to ask one question that'll get us started, and then we'll go from there. Dave, what is your greatest joy?
I think getting things done. I have a need to accomplish things. So every day I've got a list of things I want to do, and I'm happy at the end of the day if I finish everything on the list, and I'm a little bit frustrated if I don't get everything done.
Right. And at the same time, you have a very tropical setting behind you. And
that's the view from the lanai of my Maui rental condo in South Kihei with Wailea.
And that's kind of is that your happy place, so to speak?
Yeah. I've had it since 2001. And that little island that you see over, let's see, shoulders at the other shoulder, this one.
Yes, yeah.
Reversed in the camera is Kehulavi, and the U.S. Navy used to use it for bombing practice up until the 90s. And then down the beach in that same direction, a bunch of Japanese developers built some 5-star hotels and golf courses because it was cheaper to build an entire golf course on Maui than it was to get a golf membership in Japan. And the very rich visitors sitting out on the beach a little bit further south, about a mile or two, were a little bit disturbed by that island behind me getting blown up every day. So It took a bit to convince the Navy to find someplace else to practice their bomb runs.
Yeah. Why do it in one of the most beautiful settings in the world? You know?
But now nobody lives on that island, and it's a very spiritual place for the native Hawaiians. And there's been an effort over the last few years to try to find all of the unexploded ordnance and dispose of it appropriately.
Yeah, which is also not a fun job.
No.
Not a fun job. But speaking of fun jobs, and speaking of Steve Jobs, take us back a little bit to your early product days.
Well, I joined the corporate PR department at Hewlett Packard because I had been a professional environmental mediator before, and they wanted someone to help them site new facilities around the country, which are being opposed by some environmental and other groups and citizens groups, mainly the not in my backyard kind of attitude. And I had always had word processing with the organizations that I started earlier in the 70s. I was a little surprised that in the corporate PR department, there was no word processing. So I essentially performed the job of an internal product manager and brought HP Slate, an internal word processing program that ran on the HP 3000 mini computer, brought that into the corporate PR department and got all 32 people starting to use it. The neat thing about corporate PR in 1980, it was about the only department in the entire company that knew how to type. So because they knew how to type, word processing would increase their productivity significantly. Then I was interested in the career as a product manager, and one of the nice things in those days about Hewlett Packard is you could transfer laterally from one department to another. So I transferred from there into product management in the information networks division. And I had a report writer, executive report writer that sat on top of a data dictionary and a relational database. HP had a relational database before Oracle was founded, and also a unified user interface across HP's personal computers and mini computers. So after a while there, Apple was in the business of recruiting HP trained product managers. They approached me to see if I would be willing to join them and bring the first hard disk drive on a PC to market. It was a very inexpensive hard drive. It was only $3,500, and it had a tremendous amount of space. It was 5 megabytes in size. And at the time, nobody could understand why anybody would ever need 5 megabytes of storage space on a PC.
Right.
Something that was 35 times the size of a floppy disk drive. So they noticed that I knew how to manage, and I was also managing a new operating system for the Apple II by paying for the quality assurance on it and showing the product managers on that operating system called ProDOS how to manage. There was 25 people on the team. And one of the things I did is I challenged, I think his name was Dick Houston, who was the head of that development. It's over 1 million lines of code. And I said, "You'll never ship this thing on time." He says, "Yes, I will." I said, "No, you won't." I said, "Okay, let's make a bet." And we bet a valuable coin that he wouldn't ship it on time. Sure enough, he was 3 days late. And I said, "Now you don't have to give me your coin," but he gave me this valuable coin. And so management noticed I could manage, and they asked me to come over to the personal computer systems division and become the group product manager for the Apple III, which gave me the responsibility for the CPU, the monitor, the hard drive, the peripherals, printers, and about 500 other software and hardware products that our developers had developed for the Apple III. But they gave me the job with no authority whatsoever. So after about 3 weeks on the job, Steve Jobs convinced the executive committee the Apple III was occupying a space in the business market that his beloved Macintosh wants to go, and convinced them to cancel the product line, even though Steve had been the original product manager on the Apple III and shipped a flawed computer 4 years earlier. And the company was still reeling from those poor decisions. And his Macintosh had not yet shipped. This was in the May-June timeframe of 1983. The Mac didn't ship until 1984, January of 1984. So I had nothing to do for a while, and I just happened to be exiting the corporate headquarters in Cupertino on De Anza Boulevard, and Ida Cole, who was the marketing manager, ran out and grabbed me, and she later became head of international for Microsoft up in Seattle, and ushered me into a room with the president, John Scully, Joe Graziano, who was the chief financial officer, who left a few years later, became the CFO for Sun Microsystems, and Del Yoakum, who was VP of manufacturing, who was greatly disturbed that the Apple III, doing only 2,000 or 3,000 units a month, was getting in the way in his factory to build Apple IIs, which were shipping about 30 to 40,000 Apple IIs. He didn't understand that the Apple III sold average selling price with peripherals of about $7,500, and his Apple II was selling for about $1,800. So I was producing the equivalent of 3 or 4 Apple IIs. So it was really a comparison of 12,000 Apple IIIs to 40,000 Apple IIs. And we were generating tons of profit, enough to keep 1,000 to 1,500 highly paid people at work at Apple, and provide some, if not all, of the money to pay for the development of the Macintosh, since the Mac wasn't producing any profits at that particular time.
Right.
So John Scully said to me, we just canceled the product line, and we just found about 20 or 30 million dollars worth of piece parts, which today would be about $200 or $300 million, which was a sizable amount because the company was only doing about 3 or 4 billion in sales, and that would have been a big hit on the balance sheet. He says, "What should we do about it?" And I said, "John, I have all the responsibility, but none of the authority." And I said, "What do you mean, we, paleface?" And he didn't. And I said, "You haven't heard the joke?" He said, "No." I said, "There's a television show back in the 50s, I think even ran into the 60s, called The Lone Ranger. And it was a white man on a white horse called Trigger, and he wore a mask, and he galloped around the West fighting evil and doing good, and had one silver bullet in his belt. And he had a Indian sidekick by the name of Tonto." When I tell this story to Indians, I have to say it's an American Indian sidekick. And they get surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming Indians. And the Lone Ranger turns to Tonto and he says, "Tonto, we're surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming American Indians, and all they want to do is scalp us. What should we do, Tonto?" And an American Indian said, "What do you mean, we, paleface?" using the slur name for the white man at the time. So I explained to Scully how I was 8 levels removed from affecting anything on the showroom floor in the 1,800 dealers we had around the world because of all the bureaucracy. And I said, "Do you know what it's like pushing a wet noodle?" I said, and he said, "Well, what should we do about it?" I said, "Well, you give me the authority commensurate with the responsibility, and we'll sell these things and get rid of that surplus and make some money." So I told them the story of the IBM PC, where several times they tried to begin that development at their corporate headquarters in Schenectady, New York. And the senior people at IBM shut it down because it would eliminate the commission checks on the sale of mainframes. They were afraid of cannibalizing their own computing systems. I told him the story of the soul of a new machine. I think it was Alpha General that was trying to develop a new mini computer, and the old mini computer people in the same division there in Massachusetts kept shutting it down. So they moved them to Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, Research Triangle Park, to get this new machine developed. And I told them the story of an acquaintance of mine, Kelly Johnson, the head of the skunk works at Lockheed out in the Mojave Desert, and how his team could develop and ship an advanced airplane like the XR-71 and the X-1 and so forth in about 18 months, while corporate Lockheed would take 7 years to get it done. I said, "So if you give the authority commensurate with responsibility, we'll get the job done." Scully says, "I agree," because he had a Canon personal copier on his desk. And when he was Pepsi, U.S. president of Pepsi, he lived in north of New York, and his next door neighbor was the president of Xerox. And in a cocktail party or something, and he asked the president of Xerox, how come Xerox, who, other than normally not doing anything original, in this case had not shipped a personal copier yet. And the president of Xerox says, "Yeah, Canon put 10 of their best engineers, they're shipping on it now. We put 100 of our best engineers on it, and we might ship it another year."
Yeah.
So Well, he said he is firmly believes in the small, agile, full authority with responsibility. I made a presentation to the executive committee at Scully's request for options to do with the Apple III. One of them was shut the product line down. Another option was to let the market decide, which has been my philosophy, is all the MBAs in the world are not as smart as what the market is going to do. Just let the market decide. If the product continues to sell, great, build it, enhance it. If not, then obsolete the product.
Mm-hmm.
The turning point of that meeting in July 15th, 1983, was Floyd Quabi was in the room, and he was the executive vice president of sales and marketing at the time. He later went on to be a very successful venture capitalist, and then as a science and technology advisor to President George H.W. Bush. Quabi says, Dave, if we shut the product line down now, or if we let the market decide and a dealer calls you, what would you say? I said, well, if you let the market decide, I'll tell the dealer that so that they'll continue to begin to support and continue to enhance the product. And as long as that goes on, we'll continue to build it. But if you make the decision to shut the product line down, I'll tell the dealer, or I give the dealer your phone number, Floyd. And everybody laughed because doing so would have been in violation of the values of Apple, which were things like build a quality product, have consideration for your customer, good management. And so as a result of that, they asked me to take over as the business unit manager, gave me $4 million. I could sign for $200,000, and I could hire 17 people or recruit them from throughout Apple or outside. And we went on to sell 25,000 Apple IIIs, one out of every three that were ever built, generated hundreds of millions of dollars in profits, kept 1,000 to 1,500 people employed, and preserved the loyalty of the 75,000 Apple III users around the world and kept them in the Apple fold.
Wow. And that is a fascinating story to me for a couple of reasons. One being that in 1990, I think it was in 1990, I was a reseller, Apple reseller. I worked for an electronics store called 47th Street Photo. There was a 47th Street Photo in the Diamond District in Manhattan, and I got to see the supply and demand chain from a very different vantage point. We weren't able to sell a ton of product, but we were constantly getting orders. And this was at this time, these were MacBooks and the first color laptops, the I don't remember if it was like 100C model, 200C, something like that. But anyway, it was crazy because the demand for Apple was insane. And sometimes the supply would be good and sometimes it would be harder because we were still a small store. We weren't like a mega store or anything. But anyway, it was a fascinating time period. And that leads us to you becoming an author. At what point were you starting to write some of these books?
I started writing building and sailing great products in 2016. And I think I published it in either 16 or 17.
And what inspired that?
I had been teaching and consulting on product management for the previous 8 years. And I thought I might put my knowledge down in writing and share it with others. What was driving me with that and for developing all of my training courses on product management and my books is that about 35% of all the money spent on new product development each year is wasted because the products fail. And it represents somewhere between $500 billion to $1 trillion a year is just totally wasted with no return on development. And that if I could enhance the chances of product success through the things that I've learned throughout my nearly 50 years of doing this, then a lot of money could be saved and it could be used to help pay people more and be used to help prevent climate change.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. You had touched on the environment in the beginning. of our conversation. Tell me a little bit about that tie-in, and then let's talk a little bit about Spice Catalyst.
Yeah, the tie-in is that I was an environmental mediator and a product manager, or as I prefer to call them, a product success manager, frequently has to mediate between the wishes and demands and directions from engineering, from marketing, from sales, from finance, from the chief executive officer, and try to identify areas of commonality, areas of disagreement, and then try to come up with alternative solutions in the areas of disagreement so that everybody is aligned in the same direction to enhance the chances of product success. One of my clients once said to me, I asked him if you had a process that you could use to repeat each time that you developed and shipped a new product. And they said, no, they did not have a defined process. And he says the lack of that process creates a culture of blame because they had 5 products fail one right after another. And as a result of that, everybody points their fingers at everybody else. So it's very important to have that process. And I thought if I can help improve processes and the other keys to product success, then companies and individuals will have greater success and less waste.
And now you're, focusing on product success yet again and offering your knowledge, your experience as a consultant, as a trainer. And so tell us a little about Spice Catalyst.
At Spice Catalyst, we do product management consulting and training worldwide. Our number one client is Cisco, and we've trained probably close to half of all the product managers at Cisco over the last 10 or so years. And the name Spice, SPICE for the company, Spice Catalyst, is actually a mnemonic for S stands for strategy. You need to have a product market strategy. P is you need to have a repeatable process. I is you have to have the information available to all the decision makers so they can make intelligent decisions. The C, which is the most important, and that is understanding your customer. That is, what is it that the customer wants to do? Why do they want to do it? When do they want to do it? Where do they want to do it? How do they want to do it? What's standing in their way? How important is it to get it done? And most importantly, how satisfied are they with the current solution? And a good example of that is word processing. Well, before word processing, you go back to the caveman and he used some burned wood and wrote on the cave wall, but he noticed it was hard to take his writings and his illustrations from one cave to another. So they invented a slate. The caveman and woman probably didn't like their hands getting dirty, so they wrapped the charcoal with wood and they called it a pencil. But the trouble with the pencil is it always wore down the more they used it. So they went to fountain pens with the quills from birds. And that was kind of messy, especially if you spilled your ink. So the ballpoint pen was invented. And then the typewriter, the electric typewriter, the dedicated word processor. And today we've got word processing on our personal computer, which everybody uses. And it's all doing the same thing. So the innovation of doing something better stems in great part because the current way of doing something is less than satisfactory. So that's what the C stands for in Spice, and the E stands for your employees. In my books and my research, I found that you have to have about 130 competencies or skill sets in order to have a successful product. So it's important that you get your people trained in those skill sets in order to have successful products.
So the E stands for employees.
Correct, employees.
Yeah, and if people gave more thought to that notion, they would probably succeed faster. When you were mentioning quills, it occurred to me that for birds, quills were probably a pain in the ass. But
they kept losing their feathers.
Right. They're getting their feathers not only ruffled but plucked. And the one thing that came to mind when I was thinking about word processors, because I remember using word processors, and I was at the time in film school writing screenplays. And then, of course, you had daisy wheel printers. And it seemed like when you talked about cavemen that it took about 1 million years to get from daisy wheel printers to laser printers, because that I sometimes feel like I'm still in shock at the amount of time that I would spend waiting for a daisy wheel printer to print 100 pages of a screenplay, which you then had to pull the perforated edges off. It's insane how in what amounts to very little time, we joke about the caveman days, but in very little time, we made these incredible progress. Looking at the landscape now, what's your take on maybe what could be expected in the next 30 years, let's say, in this field?
There's about a dozen and a half major things happening that is causing change. The one talked about most right now is artificial intelligence.
Right.
And all sorts of ramifications on that. Another is robotics. Another is climate change. For example, I think an outfit down in Australia found a way to produce hydrogen from water that's 4 times more efficient than the current way of generating hydrogen. And if that can be scaled up, then that may very well become the replacement to oil and gas. That's a jet fuel necessary for propelling aviation, which I think contributes to about 4% of the particulate emissions around the world. And that percentage will, of course, increase as we rapidly move into renewables like solar, wind, geothermal. So those are some of the things that I talk about in my books. And I think I have some blog posts on it, which I call the perfect storm of all of these things going on at the same time. So we're going to see the pace of technological change increasing and becoming faster and faster and faster. And that, of course, is going to cause societal disruptions, because as change occurs, some folks get upset by the rate of that change and the change at all.
Yeah, a very real issue. And the fact that a lot of, on the one hand, climate change, circumstances, changes, things that affect our comfort as human beings and our functionality or our efficiency. The same things that we like to have remain the same are the things that are going to change and are changing, and therefore the need for technological advances is more rapid. The change becomes more frequent. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of people who have heretofore not paid that much attention are going to be unseated, like they're going to feel these shifts, which they probably already are, but they're going to feel these shifts in technology. And let's circle back around to, the fact that you have traditionally, shared your knowledge, shared your wisdom, but always kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve. What would you tell people who are coming now into the field of product management? And if you were to have the last word, let's say, in this interview, speak to young product managers.
I think the key is you're the champion of the customer, and you need to figure out what it is that your prospective customer wants to do. As I mentioned before, when do they want to do it? Why do they want to do it? Where do they want to do it? What's standing in their way? How important is that thing to get done? And the reason that that's important is you can't go out and ask somebody what it is that they want or what it is that they need. In order for someone to be able to do that, they have to be able to answer for the question of what is the problem they're trying to solve, and also come up with a solution. And they can then articulate that solution as the thing that they want or need. Classic story about that is allegedly Henry Ford went out and asked people if they wanted a car. And people said, no, I don't want a car. I want a faster horse. Well, he would have picked that up if he had just sat on the stoop at the local saloon in Dearborn, Michigan, not far from where I grew up, and he observed people whipping their horses trying to get through town faster, or trying to get their carriage carrying something to move faster. So if you'd ask people, would you like to have a faster horse? So we'll call it a horseless carriage, which they eventually ended up doing. People would have said yes. So I advocate a 4-step activity to figure out what it is the product should be able to do. And by the way, a service is also a product. It's just not tangible.
Right.
The first thing you do is you go and observe what it is that's going on. And that goes back to my environmental mediation. The first thing an environmental mediator does is goes and observes what is the problem. Then you interview maybe 40 to 80 prospective customers. Then you put together a survey form based upon those interview questions, which you put together and try to eliminate the questions that are things like, when did you stop beating your wife? And you survey maybe 800 to 1,200 prospective customers in your target market. And now you can put together a forecast of what the total market is, what's the total available market, what percentage of that market you could capture at what price points, and you could then calculate a return on investment for the cost of the development and marketing of that product. It's a far better way than we used to do in the olden days, where we would go top down. We'd go to a market research firm, ask them how big the market is, then we'd say, oh, we're going to capture 5% of the market, and then you put together your business plan on the top-down approach versus my recommendation of a bottoms-up approach. Then if you have data available, you access that big data with analytics. However, the problem with that is, let's suppose for a moment that when Henry Ford was thinking about his affordable automobile, the Model T, that the internet existed. And he went to the internet to see what people were searching for, because people are searching for solutions to their problems. So if he had put in the keyword car or automobile, he would have found that absolutely nobody in the world was searching for car or automobile. That the sort of wisdom of the crowds is not quite working yet until the market is there. And that's one of the reasons I have difficulties with the recommendation engines, which go along the lines of, people look at this, other people should look, you should look at this. People like this, you should like this. That's the essence of wisdom of the crowds, which came out of Stanford University's computer science department back in the 90s. It became the basis for Google search. So an example of how stupid the crowds are is, imagine a crowd in a nightclub and a fire breaks out. And for some reason, everybody thinks they can all get out the same door at the same time, versus using doors behind the stage. As an example, the wisdom of crowds going wrong. And if there's no keyword search for it, does not necessarily mean there's no market for an automobile.
Right. And just because nobody Googled elevator before the advent of the elevator doesn't mean they didn't want to go up faster.
Yep.
Right.
Or with less stress.
That's right. And where can people find you, Dave?
They can go to my website, spicecatalyst.com, search for my name on LinkedIn, and connect with me there. If they want my books, they can find all the books that I've written under David Fradin at Amazon. And it's in pretty much every Amazon store worldwide.
All right.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.
Yes.